Hi, folks. In this video, I want to give you a little bit of instruction on how to read the assigned chapters, learning, listening, listen from the inside out, and motivational interviewing, open questions, affirmation, reflective listening, and summary reflections. And then after I give you a little bit of instructions about how to read those texts, I want to just highlight a couple of key points from both of the assigned readings. So what you may want to do is listen to the instructions, pause, do your reading, and then come back to hear the key points I want to summarize or highlight. Okay, so instructions for reading. So both of these documents give you a lot of different tips and tricks for how you can listen in a more compelling and inviting fashion. And what I'd like you to do as you read them is to go through and say, I'm doing this, I'm doing this, I'm not doing that. Or that piece of advice is counter to what I have been doing. I want you to sort of inventory as you go through. What am I already doing? What do I do differently? And what am I not doing at all? And what I want you to do is pay attention for where are 2, 3, 4 new strategies that you might be able to employ immediately in your conversations, because really doing listening well, it's a matter of practice. Like, you're not going to learn it from reading this book. You're going to learn it from, because a lot of what this book will say is familiar to you. You know, pay attention to body language, ask open-ended questions, try to actually listen to what someone has said instead of formulating a response while they're talking. This may be new to some of this. All of you will find something new here, I hope, but a lot of it will be repeat. The problem isn't that we don't know it. The problem is that we fall out of habit of doing it. So pay attention to what are the 1 or 2 practices that you would like to start doing and practicing immediately. And knowing that you can come back to this chapter in 3 months or 6 months and either ask, am I still doing that thing, and take another go at it, or picking up another practice. But the way we change habit is by making small adjustments that we develop over time. So you don't have to become a magnificent listener overnight. But I do want you to read this chapter and go, where are a couple of growing edges that I am interested in pursuing? Okay, so those are the reading instructions. You can pause now if you want, and then I will highlight a couple of key points. Okay, so from the chapter from Difficult Conversations, learning, listen from the inside out. One of the things I really love about this chapter is that they give you a bunch of really practical advice for listening well. And then they say, you know what really matters? Intent. People know, even if you don't have the perfect question, or even if you don't have the perfect body language, if you really want to understand what they have to say, you're going to figure out how you can understand it, and they're going to pick up on that. People are, there's a quote I learned in graduate school that being listened to feels so much like being loved that many people don't know the difference. And I think it is just so powerful to have another person try to understand you on your own terms. And if you can hold on to that, a bunch of the other practices will fall into place. And even if they don't fall into place automatically, they will work a lot better when they're motivated by that desire to understand. I also think in order for people to do that, in order for me to do that, to really seek to understand somebody else, I am not able to do that until I feel like I have really been heard out, but not necessarily by somebody else. A lot of times I have to feel like I've really heard the contents of my own heart and mind, which might involve journaling, it might involve therapy, it might involve meditation, but I have to make some space for me to feel heard before I can really create that space for another person. So intent really matters. That's what I want to highlight from the Difficult Conversations text. Okay, now from the motivational interviewing text, y'all, it has improved my conversation so much to learn one simple guiding tactic, which is for every question that you ask, reflect back to someone what they have heard what you have heard 2 to 3 times. And a reflection might sound something like this. Oh, that's heavy. If they've been telling you about something weighty and difficult. Or you might say something like, so you've had a really stressful day. Or you want your colleagues to pick up the pace. Or it sounds like you would like a little grace in this situation. It's just a statement, a very, very brief statement of what you have just heard, maybe with an implied question mark at the end. You don't have to say, it sounds like I hear you saying, that's kind of implied. You just, what a reflection does is it first of all checks for understanding, because if you say something like, you would like your colleagues to pick up the pace here, they will either respond, yes, this has been so frustrating, blah 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 blah, or they will respond, it's not, I don't necessarily need them to go faster, it's just, and then whatever. And so they'll, if you reflect back something to them, they will either correct you or they'll use it as a jumping off point. And that's really important. It also says, hey, I'm listening. I want to hear what you have to say. Say the next thing. And questions also suggest that you are listening, but the difference between a reflection and a question is that you're in a reflection, you're saying, I think I've understood so far. I want you to keep talking. Take it where you want to go. Whereas a question says, I have heard you so far enough to formulate an intelligent question. So I have some understanding, and here's where I would like this conversation to go next. You're sort of, you're steering the conversation when you're asking a question. Also, it can feel a bit like an interrogation, which is not ideal. I have done this so many times when I was just trying to let someone feel listened to, but I was kind of peppering them with questions. So a reflection is great because it does all the things you want or a question to do, but it lets the speaker take the conversation where they want to go, which is part of trying to understand, is going where they want to go with the conversation. All right. I would say just try to practice that one. Like try to just in your conversations, listen to somebody, reflect, they'll talk some more, reflect, let them talk some more, reflect, just see what it does to people. Just see how their body language changes, see how their tone changes, how their affect shifts. Just like watch, because like, a lot of times a few good reflections plus the intent to understand can really just help people unlock in ways that are extraordinary and really interesting. So I hope that goes well for you. Let me know.